What's up, guys? It's Justin Kahn, and you are listening to The Quest, my relatively new podcast about exploring the journeys of the people around me. And today I am super stoked. I know it didn't sound like it, but I really am, to introduce my guest, Steve Huffman, the founder and CEO of Reddit, and a very good friend of mine. Steve and I, in many ways, we grew up together in startups. We both started companies together back in the same time. This was about 15 years ago in 2005. And then we were in that first batch of Y-Combinator together. And over the last decade and a half, our paths have kind of evolved in parallel tracks. We were both struggling and then finding success in the outside world and then really opening up into curiosity and learning more about ourselves. So I've seen Steve develop from being a great programmer, but kind of a troll, to now being a great leader and building one of the biggest communities on the internet. And it's been pretty amazing to watch. In our talk, we talked about the Reddit origin story and selling Reddit back in 2006, Steve's personal growth journey, coming back to Reddit as CEO in 2015 and what that was like, his relationship to the Reddit community, how we both quit drinking alcohol in the last year, and more. And so now, here's my friend, Steve Huffman. So I want to start off with the question that I'm asking every guest, which is, what's the Steve Huffman origin story?
The Steve Huffman origin story. I wish I had a good one. If I were like a comic book character, this would be like one of those, kind of knockoff other series that was made to like kind of look like the Avengers. I don't know what that is. Is that like Fantastic Four or like, a step or two removed?
Yeah, it'd be like Alpha Flight or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I'd be one of those guys because I think you could substitute many people into all of the things I'm about to tell you. Grew up in a kind of a normal home, had a good home life, did a lot of Legos as a kid, started programming when I was young, spent a lot of time on the computer, got access to the internet when I was, 12 or 13, and programmed all through high school and college, and kind of always looked up to the kind of the bubble companies and in that experience, and kind of found that like really inspiring or thrilling, and then stumbled across Paul Graham. So that story probably fits like just about every entrepreneur of my age in America, I feel like.
So I'm curious, I had my own experience with looking up at all these, .com bubble companies and saying, oh, I could build that, or I could build one of these companies. Like, what were the ones that you thought, like, that you looked at and were like, I want to build something like that made you want to build an internet company?
It was Amazon and eBay were the ones that stood out, and probably less because of like the business itself, but they were in the headlines. And so I would read the newspaper every morning and read about these companies just kind of like exploding. And eBay, I think at the time, this was like probably, this was late 90s, was more of the kind of cultural touchstone. Amazon was just selling books, like how boring. But eBay was letting people sell their like junk and whatnot and created this whole new market.
Yeah, you could buy anything. I remember buying a Rockaware jacket. That was Jay-Z's clothing line on eBay for like $40.
And eBay's still actually really amazing for random stuff when I think I remember to use it. The other thing, though, is my stepdad, who I grew up with, he was the CMO of this bubble company called Cybercash. And so even though we lived in Virginia, he had an office in San Francisco, or maybe Redwood City, actually, but out here. And so I came out for a week and just hung out in their office and got to see a tech company when I think I was 11. And they had a T1 line, which was like the fastest internet there was at the time, which was 1.5 megs a second. And I got to spend a whole week with watching these tech people, programmers and designers and stuff do their job and play on really fast internet. And that was actually a really formative moment, I think, in my life.
What was the first thing you did when you got off your shitty dial-up?
Oh, so I had shitty dial-up. So I was in Virginia. We didn't have local access to the internet, like dial-up local access for a long time. And then I had a 24 baud modem until I went to college. So it was very, very slow. Like this was 1 MP3 a night speed. So anyway, I downloaded Masters of Orion and played that for the entire week. It was like,
Nice.
I downloaded, I got a bunch of pirated games and I played them all week, I think is what I did.
I think Master of Orion was a really formative one for me. Was that Master of Orion 2?
It was the first one.
Oh, it was. You should try the second one. It's an amazing game. Okay, so then that leads you went to college. You went to UVA, met your future co-founder Alexis there. And did you know you were going to start a startup after school?
It was something my dad and I talked about a lot as a kid. It was just like what companies to start. He was always kind of fantasizing over various companies. And so I kind of always had this in my brain. And then in my family were a number of entrepreneurs, although completely different. One set of grandparents owned a variety store. Another owned a furniture store. My mom's family had a bakery. And so there's always kind of like these kind of small businesses around in my life. But I think I hadn't really put intentional, and this is probably true of my entire life, I hadn't put like intentional thought into it and certainly didn't have a plan. And so even though I kind of had all these ideas, and then Alexis, who I met on the first day of school, and we lived together all 4 years of college, we didn't talk about starting a company until the very end of college. And even still, the plan was I was going to continue with my job. I had a job as a programmer all through college. I was going to stay with that company, and we were just going to do this thing on the side. And it wasn't until kind of the Y-Combinator adventure that this became a full-time idea. So it was always kind of like happenstance, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, so tell them about the company that you were going to build on the side.
Yeah. So the idea that got the kind of most traction in our own heads was called My Mobile Menu, abbreviated as And the idea was to allow people to order food from their cell phone. Now, I say cell phone and not smartphone because this was 2004, and the iPhone didn't exist. The smartest phone was probably the BlackBerry, and so I just had this idea, and this was built around like fast food, because there's a gas station that I really liked called Sheetz. It's a kind of a mid-Atlantic gas station that also would do made-to-order subs inside. And so I'd sit there, pump my gas, and wonder what kind of sub I was going to order. And they had these little point-of-sale terminals, these electronic ordering touchscreen things. And I was like, well, somebody should just hook a computer up to that so I could be creating my sandwich, while I'm just, milling around outside. And so that was the origin of the idea. And I think it was quite, legitimately an idea ahead of its time. It's an idea that would not have worked then, but is very common now.
It's kind of like the original Order Ahead,
Totally.
That company that lets you just like order from your phone and then you would go pick it up.
Order Ahead was probably the direct version of what we were thinking. And of course, like Grubhub and Eat24 are probably, the obvious thing if you design that company in 2015, I think where you would take it.
And so what happened? How did you not end up working on?
So we had, the original plan was I would work during the day as a programmer, and then at night we'd work on And what happened was the spring break of our last year of school, I saw that Paul Graham, who was an idol of mine, was giving a talk in Boston at Harvard called How to Start a Startup. I used to look forward to his essays whenever they'd come out. There were these like kind of really exciting moments, like when a new, comic book or whatever would come out. And so Alexis and I went up over our spring break to see this talk. We took the train from Virginia to Boston. And then we met Paul Graham. After that talk, we kind of ran up to the front of the room. Alexis, as he does, introduced himself. I, as I do, just kind of sat there quietly and watched this conversation. And Paul agreed to get dinner with us afterwards. I was very excited. When I met Paul, I was like actually starstruck. I had brought my copy of his book, which was like a dog-eared. It was one of my favorite programming books, for him to sign. And so he was like, if you guys came all the way up from Virginia and you've got my book, I can spend some time with you. And so we got to meet him later, told him our idea, which he at the time loved. But I kind of learned it's not, I think it's probably not love or not. What Paul does is, I think really, really well, is takes any idea and either is like, that's dumb, or that's an interesting idea, but it's about like 100th too small. And then he like makes it huge. And so he's like, oh, that's kind of interesting, but why wouldn't you just replace all lines everywhere with this?
Yeah. He
And
pumps you up. He's like an accelerant. It's like gasoline for your kindling fire.
absolutely. And I told him, I was like, no, Paul, I don't think you're getting it. I just want to order subs while I'm pumping gas. And it's funny because if I were to go give myself, I think, feedback or advice during that time of my life, it would be to think bigger. And that's something that I think Paul did really, really well.
Still does.
He's
the
master.
He is the person he comes out and it's like your new company, whatever it is. It could be like, delivering pets. It could take over the world. He'll like pitch you your own idea back, and you'll feel like it's going to be the next Google after you hear him pitch it.
Exactly. And that was very much the case. And so it was a couple days later that Paul announced that he was creating Y-Combinator with some of his partners. And
did you think that you were an inspiration for him creating Y-Combinator?
I think we were a part of it. I mean, he told the story, which is he gave his talk. He met with people afterwards and then decided to start YC. But those people, I think, actually were not Alexis and I. It was some other group that he had dinner with that night. But I would presume we were certainly in mind, because when I emailed him thanking him for meeting with us, he suggested that we apply, because he created it, I think, for people like us. He said he felt bad not being able to invest in this stuff, or kind of not wanting to invest in stuff, and then trying to figure out how to reconcile his desire to see more startups, but he kind of turning people down.
His personal desire not to fund them.
Which turns out is a tale as old as time in this town.
Yep. So you guys learned about YC and then applied.
That's right. So we applied, took the train back up to Boston, repitched this idea, this time to the Y-Combinator crew. I remember it was like there was just some funny moments in there where Robert Morris, one of his partners, like a famous computer scientist, I remember mansplaining to him web servers or something when he was asking like how we were going to get the menu onto a phone. And so ultimately, though, I thought we had a good conversation. I thought the interview went well. They rejected us. And on the grounds of basically this idea is going to be very difficult to get off the ground now. There's just kind of too much infrastructure required. It's not just a software thing, which I think was probably true.
Yeah.
And so Alexis and I were dejected, and I think maybe even a little bitter, because, we felt like, well, Paul had all this context. We didn't have to come all the way up again. And I think that's probably, when I look back on it, the thoughts of a 21-year-old who didn't appreciate what an amazing situation he was in at the time for even, I think, being there and having that conversation. And so what followed on, though, shortly thereafter, when we were on the train right back to Virginia, is Paul called us and was like, actually, we really like you guys. We just really legitimately did not want to fund that idea. If you want to work on something else, let's come back and we can talk about that. Because Paul had this idea in his mind around a link aggregator. And so that conversation ultimately led to Reddit.
So you got off the train.
Literally got off the train. Next stop, somewhere in Connecticut, jumped over the tracks, caught the next train going north, and we're back, I think, re-interviewing or brainstorming with Paul that evening.
Awesome. And so he had this idea actually of creating a link aggregator front page of the internet.
Yeah, I forget what his idea actually was. Well, I mean, the gist of it was basically Delicious, which was a social bookmarking site at the time. Delicious, but with good content. Because Delicious was content that one would bookmark, which is kind of by definition boring content. So he wanted Delicious with good content. I had this other idea, which was Slashdot, but not for only tech. And basically Slashdot without editors. Because Slashdot had this incredible community. It was a news website on the surface, but what it really was a community that lived in the discussion. And so in that first conversation came what was ultimately Reddit was born, which was Delicious plus Slashdot. Basically, user-powered link aggregator, but with relevant content and a community kind of behind it, like Slashdot.
And so with that idea, he admitted you into that very first batch of Y-Combinator, right, where we met each other.
Yes.
Right. It's funny. Our interview was pretty similar. There was like these funny moments where, funny technical moments. I remember Emmett and Trevor arguing over whether there will be rich internet, client-rich internet applications. And Trevor was telling him, no, there's never going to be. And we're like, JavaScript apps are going to be a thing that's going to be popular. And them trying to get us to do a different idea. I remember that. And
that must be their move,
Yeah, they were like, their move was, they're smart, but let's get them to do something different because their idea sucks. But then they admitted you and I and 6 other companies, right? There was 8 companies total in that first batch. And it was all college age nerds who were into programming, working on various web applications, showing up at Paul's house every Tuesday for that summer. Like, I want to ask you, what did you think when you first got there and saw everybody?
I think, kind of referencing the first part of our conversation, it's just kind of along for the ride. There was such, I think, for me, this was a new experience because I had never been around that many like-minded people before. In college, I wasn't close with many of the other computer science guys. And I guess I say guys probably quite literally. It was mostly dudes. And, as we come, I should say that's not quite true. I had plenty of friends in computer science, but we weren't talking about starting companies. And so that was kind of a new conversation of being everybody. And this was kind of the first taste, I suppose, of the rest of my life, being surrounded by people who have this incredible amount of energy towards building. And that was a lot of fun. What I had no idea that was coming was the significance, I think, of that moment and that all of these people that I was meeting. So, you and Emmett and Chris Slow and Sam Altman and Aaron Swartz and Paul and Jessica and the significance that all of these people would have in my life. It just seemed like a fun thing to do. And I'd say my life horizon back then was probably, just like a week or two. It's like, okay, well, I guess this is what we're doing this week.
And so over that summer, I remember you guys were the ones who probably made the most tangible progress on actually building and launching your startup out of everybody. Like Sam was out there, he was running this company Looped, which was kind of like this mobile social network, but I think they need to do all these biz dev deals to actually get it approved because of the way mobile, there's no iPhone or Android then. So they had to get approved on every phone. So there was no progress at all, but somehow he was able to raise millions of dollars.
Yeah, I think Sam was it just seemed like he spent all of his time fundraising.
Right. He was out there doing deals.
Yeah. He wasn't at our dinners. Remember, I think he was always out here, in the Bay Area, talking to Sequoia or whatever.
Yeah. And then there were some of these other guys who kind of seemed like they had, I remember there's this click fraud detection business or something, but we didn't know what was going on. Yeah. ClickFacts and other people were working on various demos of their stuff, but you guys built it. I remember you started with 0, and then 2 weeks later you had something that was a list of links. And then a couple weeks after that, or maybe a week, everybody in the batch had an account. And so you had your first 10 users or whatever. And then it just kept kind of going from there over the summer. You just kept making tangible progress.
Yeah. And it's funny that you pointed out because I've never really kind of thought about it that way, that we had I think by the end of the summer, a product with users. Because I always think of Reddit that summer as this bit of a mess. But one of the reasons for that was we had Paul Graham, I think, gave us the consistent attention and held such a high, it was just kind of the Paul Graham style to ship really quickly and iterate and then just iterate. And so I had him in my inbox, it seemed like hourly of do this. And so it was just such a whirlwind that I never took a step back to appreciate. And I didn't appreciate this until years later when we started working on Hitmonk, how awesome it was to have users, to have real users who are using our product on purpose. That was actually a very special thing. But it was the only thing that I'd ever done. So I just kind of thought, hey, well, this is just what it is, I guess.
Yeah, I think you were the most kind of Paul Graham ethos company in the batch, probably because he was so invested in the idea and you guys. you really were iterating in public, whereas a lot of other people are kind of like working on their product, including ourselves, and like afraid to launch it, or we had these theoretical users that we would get one day, but we were just had to build towards that today. And you guys just put out a very simple site there and started iterating. I think the first version was running on your laptop, right?
Yes.
Like
I was running on my laptop over an AOL connection.
Yeah.
Because that was like the internet that we could get in our little apartment there. And but I remember the email Paul sent me, and I should find it. It was like the second week of June. So we'd been working on this for literally 2 weeks. And he said, I don't know why you haven't launched yet. It's either because you're not capable of doing it or you're waiting till it's perfect. And I don't know which is worse. And I was like, all right.
Never meet your heroes.
Yeah, exactly. I think I was a little pissed for a minute, but then we launched it. I think I was always trying to prove myself to Paul. And so I think I emailed him back like in the next couple hours, maybe day, and like with a link of like, okay, here it is.
Here it is.
It was nothing. It was just like I couldn't even call it a CRUD app. It was like it just had the C.
Yeah. Just a list of links. I remember that. And then I remember the first thing I ever posted on Reddit that actually got some votes. And it was an article about how Somali pirates attacked a cruise ship.
Yes.
It's like it on Yahoo News or something like that.
I remember that because I probably remember all of the first links on Reddit, because I guess we were kind of so close to it. But I think in the end, it's funny, of all of the like goofy Polygram stories I like to tell, when I look back on that time, is how he was right almost all of the time. And there's definitely some ideas we didn't pursue that I still think are really goofy, but I wonder like what would happen if we had, because his batting average was pretty high.
And so after that summer, you guys got funded by Paul. He invested, basically did your angel round,
yes.
which was like $70,000.
Another $70,000, yeah.
And then basically, I remember we were both in Boston. Emmett and I were working on this calendar app, Kiko, which eventually, didn't really go anywhere. And you guys were working on Reddit, and we're working for this next year, basically, on our respective startups. And we would basically come over. We gave up kind of halfway through, maybe. Emmett and I would just come over and play like Final Fight on your couch while you theoretically worked on Reddit.
Yeah.
But I guess it kind of grew and grew and grew. It just grew over that next year. Yeah,
it just kept growing. I added features where I could. But by that era, by the time we lived in, so we had the first summer, and then we moved in with Chris. Chris and Zach were another startup pair. Zach went back to school. We moved in with Chris. Lived with him for a couple of months. And then Chris would eventually join Reddit.
And he's still there today.
He's our CTO.
Yeah.
He joined us. He was finishing his PhD in theoretical physics at Harvard. He would wake up. I don't know when he'd wake up, because it was long before I woke up, every single day. So I never saw him in the morning. And then he'd come home at night. I want to say late, like 9, 10 o'clock at night. And then he'd work late at night. And we'd go to bed around the same time, which was really late. And so he was just kind of burning the candle at both ends. And then we lived with him for a couple of months, and then we moved into that new apartment in Davis Square. And that's the one where you and Emmett would come visit during the day, or I don't know, often. The day, the night, I guess. And at the time with Reddit, I was mostly just fighting spam. I think it was mostly the issue.
That was a pretty early problem, huh? I remember those early days. Actually, a funny story from then is how you guys moved in with Aaron Swartz.
Yes.
And I remember, we were up like all the time. Like we'd come over until like 3 a.m. or whatever, hanging out. And one time you and Alexis were trying polyphasic sleep.
Oh.
And Aaron, I remember talking to Aaron about it, and he's like, these are guys who can't get up before noon. There's no way they're going to last on polyphasic sleep.
And he was correct. We made it, less than a day.
One day.
Yeah. Now they say that first day is the hardest, which I couldn't tell you because we didn't make it past that first day.
So spam was like a pretty early on problem for you guys at Reddit. Like before users, or like the majority of users found the site, spammers found it.
It wasn't, it's funny, it wasn't like a first 6 months problem or even kind of it was like coming into around our 1 year anniversary, it became an issue. It was kind of the second summer. And that's when, we just started to see more spam and kind of more vote cheating. And that's where we basically think we spent a lot of our time, I and Chris both, trying to kind of stay ahead of that. And so we didn't add a lot of features during that time. But, despite that, the thing about Reddit has always been thin on features. It continued to grow and evolve because really it was like I still describe it today, but certainly back then it was just like this living organism. And so as long as we kind of kept it a little bit healthy, it would mostly grow on its own, which was our experience.
I remember that. It was it's kind of like Twitter in that way, where the users and community have defined a lot of what it's become. But I remember you guys basically didn't add any you just did improvements to make it faster, more robust, and work with your like insane database schema at the time. I remember
we still have that.
And but the one feature you did add was self-posts,
yes.
Which I like totally didn't get at first. But the ability to have a self-referential post that was basically like starting a thread, but that really unlocked a lot of the behavior that exists on Reddit today, doesn't it?
Well, it's so funny because the self-post. So what it was is, a user would submit a post, and before this, every post was an external link, so it had to be a link to something. But then, of course, that post on Reddit also would have comments, and so the page with the comments for that link submission on Reddit had its own URL on Reddit that was guessable because it was just a counter in the URL, and so users figured out that if you could guess the URL of its own future comment page, you can make a post that linked to itself. And so then they could just create discussions on Reddit. Now, what's funny about that is sometimes they would guess wrong. And so, the post might be like, hey, has anyone else tried polyphasic sleep? And then it would link to the comment section of an article about something, completely different. And so that happened fairly regularly and often hilariously. And so I created a feature that instead of submitting a link to a URL, you could just type in the word self. And this is like a classic, I think, Reddit product strategy, which is like, there's a couple of classic things in here. One, follow what our users are trying to do and make it easier. But then two, do it in the most like circular, roundabout, obtuse way possible. Like instead of just making like a text post, like a blog, which they existed, by the way, and existed on Reddit. This is what's so silly, because this was the idea when Aaron joined Reddit is we were going to merge links and blogs. And so like why we made people do this kind of like goofy engineering thing, like type in the word self just to make a text post it's just, I don't know. I think it's kind of I suppose the way I was wired then, but users figured it out. And it was that way for years before we actually just made a button that was like create a text post. Yeah, now it's like 60-70% of the content on Reddit. It's like the majority of content.
And one thing I wanted to ask you about Reddit is, when I get asked about you and Reddit, I always explain Reddit as it really has the ethos of Steve. Like I think Alexis was really in the very beginning kind of the front man and like talking to people about it. But I always say that like Reddit is reflective of your personality. There's a strong belief in personal freedom and kind of internet freedom, but there's also this element of internet trolling, and the community is, loves to, in a way, make fun of, tear down like the things around, or like just likes to see the world burn sometimes. Do you agree? Do you think? Why do you think the community developed the way it did?
I think there's certainly truth to that. Because the product was built, it was built around my sensibilities. So both around the personal freedom aspect and then the kind of design, like the utilitarian design of it. And of course I wrote all of the copy. So all of the error messages were like snarky and like, why did you break Reddit? That sort of stuff. And so definitely, I think my personality came through on Reddit, but for that matter, so did Alexis's, because we did, I think, spend a lot of time together in that era. Follow that through the rest of the story, though. There's an aspect of it where I think it was also the ethos of the time on the internet, right? Which is this sense of freedom, and everybody has a voice and everybody can share. And so I think we felt very strongly that, and this was, I think, something that was unique about Reddit relative to other kind of, sources of news or media, that we didn't have an editorial position. I thought that was very important, that we, like, how, it's almost like, it's not that we didn't want to do it, but it was like, how dare we?
Right.
And so Reddit definitely started to develop a voice, and it may have maybe have been kind of started by us, but like the platform, I think the voice also evolved. And so I think one of the things that's made Reddit special over the years is that voice, I think, was a reflection of the zeitgeist, of kind of what was going on online and in the world, for that period of time.
And yeah, Reddit has that voice, and it's like the Reddit hive mind in a way. Then there's maybe, Twitch chat would be an example of another, maybe more terrible in some ways voice on the internet. But like Twitter, Facebook, they're not really as unique and distinct. Like, why do you think Reddit is a huge site and huge community? Why do you think it is, what about the site has to help develop that voice?
It's a really interesting question. So, Reddit now is thousands of communities, and each of those communities has its own kind of distinct voice. And the idea of Reddit, the platform, having a kind of a singular voice is waning. But at the time, in the first couple of years, there were no communities on Reddit. There was just one. And so that community started to develop because all of Reddit was a shared space. And so I think one of the things that happened is when we allowed users to make their own communities, it was the same people, but now spread across, hundreds and then thousands of communities. And so all of the communities created probably before, let's call it 2015 or so, had a similar voice. But it's definitely, I think by 2015, certainly, and through to now, that kind of original, it's still in there. You can still hear it, especially if you were there in the early days, but It's definitely diluted. And there are other, I think, powerful perspectives and personalities that exist in kind of the collection of communities that's Reddit.
Yeah. Okay. So kind of zooming backwards though in time, you after that very first year, you guys ended up selling the company. And like, what are the events that led to that and deciding that, and what was the impact?
Yeah, so we met Conde Nast, this guy Karosh Karamkani, in, I want to say, March of 2006. And he approached us very directly. We want to buy Reddit. And we were actually very excited about that. But what we told him was, no, we have no intention of selling. And the reason we were excited about it is because that was the story, right? That's the story I had read about in high school. That's the story that Paul Graham loved to tell. And then it just felt like that's the end of the story, or near the end of the story, which is you start an internet company on a shoestring, you get users, you have no intention of figuring out how to make it a business, and then you sell the company, and then shortly thereafter you get dissatisfied and quit. It's
the entrepreneur's dream.
It quite literally was. And so we're like, okay, here we are. We have to play this right though. So he's like, we don't want to sell. So we ended up doing a joint project with them called lipstick.com.
Oh, I remember that.
it was Reddit for celebrity news and gossip, and it was actually a lot of fun to work on. And so we just made this other Reddit that was just for celebrity news. I and a bunch of Conde Nast employees. It was like kind of these Midwestern housewives who were kind of contracting would moderate this together. So every day we'd share a bunch of links and we'd kind of talk about what we were taking down and whatnot. It was a lot of fun. I still these women. I only know them through email and kind of online conversations that we used to run Lipstick together. So we did that for that summer, and eventually we, agreed to sell the company to Conde Nast. And the deal took forever to do because we had no idea what we were doing. We didn't know what we wanted. We over-negotiated every term. So it took like 6 months to do that deal, which was, I think, a small, certainly a very small deal by today's standards. But even then, it wasn't a massive deal. But when that closed, that was, I think, a very emotional and profound moment because, again, it was like I think it was less about the selling the company or the money and more about kind of the validation of we did what we signed up to do as part of this Y-Combinator adventure. And I was personally, I think, very proud to have succeeded in Paul's vision for an online business. But then there was this conflict because on one hand, it felt like the end, like we did it.
Yeah.
And I remember that was my attitude. It's like, okay, I'm going to go work on this thing for a little while and then I'm going to go do something else. But I loved Reddit. And that was actually, it took me probably years to kind of put that together. It's like, how can I leave this thing? I love it, but I'm supposed to leave because that's the story. And so I honestly wrestled with that for quite a while. But I think that was still kind of the narrative in my head when I ultimately left Reddit 3 years later.
I remember that sale, it was vindicating for Y Combinator's for first exit. Paul actually made money. Everyone else looked up to you guys, and we were, that was the dream. We all wanted to have the story, and it made you a millionaire. You and Alexis were both millionaires after that. But then what happened? I mean, I guess you kept working at the company, and was it different? Was it dissatisfying? Was it satisfying?
I think I was still in the same life mode that I was, before we sold the company, which was my planning horizon was like a week or two. I didn't think about my life's purpose. I didn't think about Reddit's purpose. I just every day thought, what are we going to do today to make Reddit a little bit better, or to hopefully help Reddit not get a little bit worse, because we're still fighting spam and whatnot. Then, kind of spending time with my entrepreneur friends. At that time you were, I think, just getting Justin TV off the ground. And so, and we had moved to California. We had all moved to San Francisco, and Y Combinator had that new batch of startups. And so it just seemed like I was very, very, I think, in the present in that time of my life. And I'm curious how you felt during that time of your life, if any of that kind of rings true for you.
Yeah, it totally resonates. And it's really one of the reasons why it's so much easier to start a company or work on a project when you're younger, right? When you're in your early 20s. I didn't think about the future at all. I never planned more than a month in advance. Didn't have any obligations, didn't have a mortgage, didn't have a family. So it was very easy to just work on a project, a startup, and just be completely engrossed in it. And then, maybe see friends once in a while, and that's it. That's your whole life. There was nothing else. I mean, it was unhealthy in a lot of ways because, the ups and downs of whatever that project were create a tremendous emotional thrash for me. And I didn't really have the tools to deal with it. But in some ways, it's not bad. In all ways, it was fun, right? It could be fun to be engrossed. It was like living in a movie or something like that.
Well, that's you just touched on something that I'd never considered before, which is after the sale, working on Reddit actually became a lot more fun because we didn't have to think about selling the company anymore.
Yeah.
We had kind of achieved what we had set out to achieve. And so it just kind of felt like everything was bonus. We had gotten that kind of I think, the validation. And that's probably why I was able to leave, is because I felt like we had done what we said we were going to do. And I didn't have a vision beyond that.
Yeah. And so you left Reddit. That was a couple years later, like 2009 or
2009,
2008.
yeah.
And I guess over the past 11 years, I've seen you go on this personal growth journey, right? Like it's been I feel like you know, in a way, I may be parallel to like a lot of our other friends and batchmates, just starting off really dedicated to startup and really focusing on building fame and fortune in the world, and then kind of expanding to care about other things and learn about other things and go deeper. You know, I wanted to ask you, like, when do you think that started for you?
I know exactly when it started. It started in the summer of 2012. It was the first time I took mushrooms.
Yeah.
And I think prior to that, I kind of, in the same way that kind of Reddit had this utilitarian aesthetic kind of in the product, that's what the kind of the inside of my head looked like. And I didn't, so I think what I was short on was empathy. And I remember it was kind of like, it's like my imagination went from, or kind of my worldview went from black and white to color.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated things that I had not appreciated before in art and I think in other people.
I remember that's the summer that we went to Burning Man for the first time, or I went the year prior, and then you came with me that time.
Yeah.
And you loved it. Like you were just like 100. It was like from 0 to 60 miles per hour in 1 second. You just, yeah.
Yeah, that whole summer, and probably the climax was Burning Man, got to see, I think, this other side of humanity that I didn't know existed. And I think there's this change of, I think that was the beginning of adulthood for me. And I think of adulthood as the moment when you realize not only do you not know everything, like you don't know anything.
That's so beautiful. I love that.
And so it just blew my mind that there's just so much out there and so much going on and all of these like incredible, amazing, interesting people. And I had been kind of living in this kind of narrow path. That's, I think, absolutely changed my perspective about, and now it took years, right? It was kind of like a light switch that was like, it's not like I turned a light switch on and all of the lights in the building came on. It's just, they just kind of like started flickering.
Yeah.
And I think it took a long time for the lights to turn on, and you know, maybe they still are. But it was just enough of a spark that it's like, oh, I have a lot to learn. Because I don't think I would have said that when I was, 25, that I have a lot to learn.
And so how did that manifest in kind of like how you were living your normal life? Like, what are the things that it sparked for you?
Well, there was, at first it probably wasn't, it was quite painful. It was around that time where my marriage started to fall apart as well. And it was kind of I don't know any way to describe it other than like a midlife crisis, where I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what my values were. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I think it just kind of started this whole swirl, and it's been, I think, a journey over years, because that was in the middle of Hitmonk. So the second company that I started with another friend, and getting back on that path of kind of seeking validation again.
Yeah. Starting a new startup, trying to get an exit, build it up.
Yeah. So getting back on that rat race, and at the same time going through this kind of personal crisis. And then that went into rejoining Reddit in 2015, which was just adding another, few gallons of gasoline to this kind of fire and chaos in my life. I mean, that was a probably 5, 6 year, 7 period where everything was just jumbled. And yeah. I think it's in picking up the pieces of that that has helped me grow so much over the last really 2 or 3 years. years where I can say like that phase of my life is now over.
There's so much I want to talk about. One thing that it strikes me, I guess this is jumping ahead from where I want to go in the conversation, but now at this phase, 5 years into coming back to Reddit, and I want to go back to asking you about like what it was like to go back, but 5 years in, what and I think probably most of our friends would agree, observe is, you've really come into being comfortable with what you're being the CEO of Reddit, of what's going on. There's no need to like make a change or to sell the company or for it to be any certain way. It just seems like you are comfortable running it and accept whatever comes with that.
It's very true. There's some important epiphanies in there that I think led to that comfort. And one of the kind of the big ones that tie it all together is sort of what you just said, which is around acceptance of, I was always kind of chasing, like, I want to be a great CEO. I want to be like Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos. And at some point in there, I had this kind of thought process where it's like, I'm never going to be those guys. Like just read about their origin stories. They're like smarter and they work harder and they have different habits. They're just different people. I'm never going to be those guys, but I can be the best Steve Huffman. And in fact, that's my only option. So, and the same with Reddit. Instead of comparing Reddit to, Twitter and YouTube and Instagram, all of which were started after us and exploded past us, just coming to terms with, okay, well, that's not Reddit's journey. Reddit's on Reddit's journey. And so I'm going to try to be the best version of me I can be. And we're going to try to build Reddit into the best version that Reddit can be. That's freeing because now we're not chasing I'm not chasing these other people. We're not trying to build ourselves in the image of these other companies. We are who we are and we're going to do our best with it.
That's awesome. But before you had that realization, so 5 years ago, I remember we were talking about you had the option to go back. Reddit was in crisis, right? It had 3 CEOs in a very short period of time. And I don't even remember what the specifics of the crisis were, but there were no other volunteers for the job. And Sam Altman, who is now the major investor in Reddit, reached out to you and was trying to recruit you to go back. And you weren't sure if you wanted to do it.
Yeah, well, yes and no. On one hand, I wanted to do it because I knew Reddit better than anybody. That I was confident in. And I was so used to, with Reddit, kind of flying by the seat of my pants. Like, okay, we've got this problem. Here's how we're going to fix it. Okay, we've got this problem. Here's how we're going to fix it. And I can see Reddit not doing those things and letting it get away from them, and the users get out of control and these communities get out of control. And so I could see, like, as a matter of practicality, I've got some ideas here. Yeah. But I was at Hitmonk. I was at another company that I started. And that was on its own journey. And we had a team of, I think, 70 or 80 at the time. I hired at least half that team personally. And I really loved them. I loved the culture of that company. I loved working there. I loved the team we had. We were in the middle of an M&A process. And so the idea of like, okay, we used to, Adam was my co-founder at Hitmonk. We used to describe ourselves as the head and the heart. He was the head and I was the heart. And so we're in the middle of trying to sell this company. We're hanging in there by our fingernails, and like the heart of the company is going to leave. Like that was just an agonizing thought. And so it took a lot of convincing from Sam and then others on the Reddit board to convince me to take that job. And honestly, what convinced me was 2 things. Basically the crisis situation at Reddit became so visceral that it became existential for Reddit.
Yeah.
And so it was that weekend of the blackout, of the crisis on Reddit, where the moderators basically turned the site off. We were up with our friends in Sonoma for a friend's 30th birthday party. And I was talking to Michael, our friend Michael Seibel.
Yep. Who's now on the Reddit board.
Joined our board 3 weeks ago or a month ago. I was talking to him at dinner thinking about this, and he's like, Steve, if you did this, you're just running into a burning building. And it's like you're running into a burning building, and then when you get there, there's like alligators in there too, and it's haunted, and there's something about the way that Michael kind of talks and story tells that I actually found very energizing. And I was like, in a roundabout way, I remember thinking, you know what, that's what I want in my life.
Nice.
I kind of like, you know what, that sounds like a lot of fun. And so in sleeping on it that night, that's ultimately where I came to the conclusion, Reddit's more important to the world than Hipmunk will ever be. And it'd be a real shame if Reddit died. And I want to, if I can prevent that from happening, that's what I want to try to do.
And so I think you went back immediately, right? It was like that was July 4th weekend. And then like you went back on Tuesday or something like that.
My first day was that Friday, July 9th. Yeah. And it took a couple of days to kind of work out the details. But I had thought so that was Saturday morning when I had that crystallizing thought. I called Sam, told him I'm in, and I thought I could be back at work as fast as Monday. And then every day it was like, okay, is tomorrow going to be the day? Is tomorrow going to be the day? And it turned out to be Friday. But yeah, it was, I think, about as close to immediate as you could get in this situation.
So what was it like walking in there? Because I mean, you went in and you didn't know anybody who was there.
I knew 2 people that were there, and I never worked with them. But I used to hang around Reddit for a little while, so I knew a couple of people. It was so hard.
I mean, how big was it was like 80 people, right?
It was the same size as Hipmunk. So I think on Tuesday or Wednesday of that week, I had told Hipmunk that I was going back to Reddit. And it was I think a bittersweet moment. I was crying. Everybody was crying. I think I think nobody wanted me to go. Maybe a few did. But they're also, I think, very supportive of me leaving, which I think made it almost harder. And then, but really feeling the love there, I think the mutual love between me and Hipmunk. Walking into Reddit, where that was not the emotion that I would use to describe that situation. It was like talking to a room full of people who, like, with PTSD, and telling them, okay, you're going, back to war. I was the 3rd CEO in 6 months. They were just going through the ringer in the press and on the site. It was so hard for everybody, and I had no credibility with them. And so I think I said what I could. I'm sure it was very awkward and not inspiring. But I think as with many things in life, Paul Graham is probably right, which is like, well, ship the first version and then iterate. And so that's what we did. I just dived in and we just iterated and every day tried to get a little bit better.
And so in the last 5 years, it's been pretty transformational for the company, right? You've raised hundreds of millions of dollars. The team is hundreds of people. It's very different from the team that you inherited. And the site is substantially different. You shipped major redesign and all this. What are the things that, like, what are the core changes that you instituted that have allowed Reddit to, to grow in this way?
It's taken 5 years. So all of the changes that we've gone through certainly not happened overnight. I think there are some kind of ethereal or abstract changes that comes with, like, I think that the return of a founder to a company and bringing some of the kind of the moral authority back and a little bit more of kind of our values. Though it's taken me, for what it's worth, a long time to articulate kind of my and our values at Reddit. But even without having the perfect words, they were there. And so I think that's one aspect to it. And another aspect is just the practical work we've done. Looking at the site, the challenges we faced. We had communities that were ruining Reddit, and we had behavior that we didn't feel as welcome on Reddit. there's been a lot of work we've put into addressing that. And it's taken us, it's not just like kind of software and policy work, although there's been a lot of that. I think the hardest part has been finding that balance between, what we talked about earlier and kind of our desire at Reddit to kind of give people personal freedom and let this community and site evolve, but then also looking at parts of it and saying, well, this is not right. This is not where we want to be. This is working against what we believe in. And so finding that balance has absolutely taken time. But I think we've done a good job at that. We always have more to go, but I think we've come so far on that dimension. And then finally, probably the most important thing is just hiring and bringing in people who believed in Reddit, who were willing to take on a hard problem. And join Reddit when we were in the press for all of the wrong reasons. And, sign up for this adventure with me and the team. And then just, I think a lot like the same way that I think we all try to allow Reddit to grow, I think the challenge for any companies as the leadership of a company is allow the company to grow. Because at best you can kind of shepherd it and shape it, but much of it is, I think, out of my control.
And so now, like, you are one of the biggest properties on the internet, one of the biggest websites, biggest communities. It's like the number 6 biggest site in the United States and in the top 20 globally, right? So what's it like to run what's effectively almost like an online country?
I get asked some version of that question very often, and I guess I would say, like, I don't know. I think I've grown and changed as a person, I don't think of myself that way, and I don't think of kind of that's what we're doing. And so maybe once in a while I'll have this thought. And to be fair, I've been having this thought for 15 years now. And I think, wow, Reddit is so much bigger than I ever thought it would be. But I thought that when we had 1,000 users, and I thought that, when we have, hundreds of millions of users. And so it's always seemed, I think, abstract to me. It's just Reddit is this thing that I work on. It's this thing that I care about. But I don't think of it as mine or that I'm in control of it. I think of it as a living organic thing.
So you are just a contributor in a way to what, how the community shapes and what goes on, but it's not yours.
Oh, there's no way it's mine. It's the community's. It's like saying, like, the founder of a city. Would you ever say, like, the city is theirs? I can only think of 2 city founders, and that's Romulus and Remus, who founded Rome. And they're only famous because I think one of them killed the other one with a shovel. That's why I can remember that story. Like, it's founders of cities are irrelevant, and I think of Reddit as a very large city. And so we were there. We did some of the planning. We still, I'm kind of like a city planner. When I say that, I'm like, because I live in San Francisco, so naturally, like, I hate city planners. So I've got this job.
So that leads me to actually, I guess, a good what I wanted to ask you, which is, I mean, everybody hates city planners. I mean, I think you're running this city with hundreds of millions of people in its constituency, and no one's ever happy, right? Like, what is that like? Or like, what's your relationship with the Reddit community? Because you get a lot of, it might be the squeaky wheels, in the community, but you get a lot of, I would say, negative feedback sometimes from the community. Like, how is that?
I think you're very generous. I'm very much detested by lots of Reddit. I think, like most city planners, probably accurately, most people don't know and don't care. But the people who care don't like me. And it definitely doesn't feel good. But when I put myself in their shoes, I would think, well, I'd be frustrated too. Because when I look at Reddit, all I see are the 1,000 ways that I want it to be better. But I can't let, like, kind of negative feelings about that prevent us from doing our jobs. And so there's some aspects of it where I know it's just simply unavoidable. we're doing things that I know some part of the community they're just not going to like and they're going to be very angry about. And so I just have to accept that that is going to be the case. Now, there are other areas where, I wish I had explained it better. I wish I had chosen better words. I wish I'd spent more time kind of being present, just kind of being a better leader. In those moments, one cannot improve without admitting their kind of weaknesses. And so I look at those moments as learning moments and learning opportunities to hopefully be better for folks. Thankfully, what I don't do is get my validation from those people. I get my validation from my friends and my family and the people I care about. So it's not like me not being liked with the communities of Reddit. I don't take it personally because I understand and accept it.
It's kind of a thankless job.
Perhaps in a sense, but that kind of implies that one works for the thanks. And what makes me happy is seeing Reddit grow. And in that respect, it's if the opposite of a thankless job, is it a thankful job or a fulfilling job? I certainly feel thankful that I get to watch this thing grow. And that is, I think, more than enough motivation and fulfillment for me.
Amazing. So one other thing I wanted to ask you about was we both made a pretty substantial change in our lives about a year and change ago. Both of us quit drinking alcohol, which is kind of surprising because if you named two people you would expect to quit drinking, I don't think anybody who knew us would have picked us. We'd have been like the last draft.
Well, but now in hindsight, wouldn't you think, if you're to pick two people out of a friend group, wouldn't you go, well, if it's the two guys who are raging the hardest, like maybe they should quit drinking?
Yes, I mean, should certainly.
Like, it's not like the list of people who quit drinking didn't at some point in their lives, raise an eyebrow or two.
That's true. I used to think, people ask me, how much did you drink before you quit? And, when I thought about it, I tried to calculate, and I think I've probably drank well over 10,000 drinks. I just did the back of the envelope over 20 something years, and, it was a lot. So, I never thought I was like a professional drinker basically, and I never thought I would quit. Can you talk to us a little bit about your process and deciding that you wanted to?
Yeah, it was definitely a process, and I think it was probably there were some false starts in there. I tried over the years the occasional like dry January, a month off here or there, and it always felt like torture.
Yeah.
Like, and sometimes it was kind of that fun kind of torture, like, can I do this? But like the moment of like going out and being out with friends, or even just being over dinner with friends and not being able to drink, it just felt weird. And so it was always it wasn't fun.
You're like white knuckling it the whole time. You're just waiting for that period of time to be over.
Yes. Yeah. And it felt awkward. And if I go out dancing with friends, which I love doing, I'd be very self-conscious and I didn't feel like myself. And so I'd always kind of look for those months to be over. And then, but obviously, like I knew there was something there because I'd always tried different versions of drinking less. Right? I went through a phase where it's like I'd only drink beer, or I'd only drink, one drink a night, or I'd keep a count on my watch or phone to making sure I was only drinking one drink an hour. And so finally, it's like, and I never, during any of that time over years, said I have a problem with drinking. But one of the things I've learned is that like your body and brain will do things for you that maybe your conscious isn't ready to yet. And I think like my body and brain were telling me like, you need to stop doing this. And I think a couple of things happened all around the same time that I think kind of came together. One was you quit drinking, and I think like enthusiastically. And so
yeah, I had to announce it very publicly just to keep myself on the wagon.
And it's funny, they say not to do that. I later learned they say like you shouldn't do that.
Is it like because when you fall off, then it's like feels even worse, or?
Yeah, because you wrap your identity in it.
Yeah.
And then having a mistake all of a sudden becomes like this crisis instead
Yeah.
of, I think for a lot of people, it could just be a mistake. But for me, for what it's worth, it was definitely an inspiration. So I appreciate that you did that. Two, my body was actually starting to reject it.
Really?
I would think about drinking and feel sick. And it's kind of one of those things, because I would tell people when I'd see people in similar situations, I'd be like, listen to your body, listen to your body. This is something I'd say, like when some people are going through something, like, listen to your body, listen to your brain, it's trying to tell you something. So I'm like, okay, Steve, like, something's going on here. And then three, I finally had this kind of clarifying thought that everything, literally everything, I don't think this is an exaggeration, negative in my life was either directly caused by or adjacent to alcohol.
Wow.
And so instead of framing quitting drinking as, I have to do this is a challenge, I'm going to give up this thing I love and suffer and, boredom and awkwardness. When I look at it as, wait, I've got an opportunity to eliminate stress and negativity on my life on this like grand scale and make all my relationships better. And all the other stuff that people talk about, not drinking, sleeping better and losing weight and more energy, all those things are also true. But like, there's like this thing I could do that's free that does all of that for me. And so and then it just became such an easy decision. And I haven't even looked back.
Yeah, I was surprised how easy it was for both of us to just say it and then stick with it. And I felt that when I wasn't waiting for an end of the tunnel, when I wasn't waiting for the month to be over, the dry January to be over, it was a lot easier just to say, hey, this is the new normal and I'm never going back.
Yeah. And there was probably, I remember there was like, so I quit in July. So it was just over a year ago. And I remember Thanksgiving was this like moment. I was with family and everybody's kind of doing the Thanksgiving dinner and wine and this and that. And I remember that was the moment where I was like, oh, I don't even have any cravings anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even miss it.
That's awesome. That's an incredible feeling.
It really is. And then you and I have discussed this before. There's always been all these benefits that I didn't see coming. Like going to a party and knowing that I'm going to be completely predictable.
You're not throwing the wild card, Steve, in there.
Yeah, exactly. I think drinking meant basically I was attaching a random number generator to my life.
And the lives of your friends, in a way.
Yeah, gosh, no. As all these stories kind of flash before my eyes. And just knowing that I'm going to go out, I'm going to have a good time, and I'm going to go home, in a good mood, and wake up tomorrow feeling great every single time. That is a freeing thought.
For sure. It's do you think this is part of a larger zeitgeist? I hear more and more people who seem to be, reconsidering their relationship to alcohol, but maybe it's just that you and I are getting old.
I think there are two things. I do think there is a larger zeitgeist because I've read about it. The millennials drink less, and we have a good friend in the alcohol industry, and she's mentioned it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that it's a kind of a more common conversation. I read the culture articles about mocktails being more common, and non-alcoholic beer. I mean, you see it, right? Heineken makes one now. I'm blanking on the other ones, but there's a couple new ones now that didn't exist. So it's definitely a shift there. But I also think, this is the other thing I've learned, is how many people don't drink or don't have a drinking problem that I never noticed before. How many people go out,
like normal people,
yeah, and don't drink, or they only have one and they're done. Like, I never noticed that before. I suppose at the same time, I also never noticed how many people have a drinking problem. But I don't like this. I don't want to judge and frame it that way. But I never noticed how much people drink before. I'll say it that way.
Yeah, I don't have any need to convert people to non-drinking status. I feel that I enjoy seeing people enjoy drinking still, and fondly remember some of the maybe more positive experiences,
Of
but
course.
without feeling the need to I'm not like I don't want to regulate it further in society or anything like that. It's just like it was kind of my time to be done, for myself, and I just felt that like the right time for me.
Well, it's total tragedy of the commons. If I went to the first wedding I went to and didn't drink, I was looking around and I was like, if nobody was drinking, this would be really boring. So I'm glad everybody's having a great time, and I can get on their level. I have enough muscle memory around having a good time that I can just do
You
it.
can get back there.
Yeah, I can. And but if nobody was drinking, this would be horrible. So I was like, you guys go get it. Well, the one thing I learned though in this is I used to think that if we went out, that it would just kind of take me a drink or two to loosen up.
Yeah.
To feel more chatty and to put the week behind me or whatever it is. And what I've learned is this doesn't take a drink or two. It just takes an hour or two.
Right.
And then, I can easily get on somebody's level.
I found that for myself, it's, I used to feel the same way. I was like, I could never dance sober, let's say.
Yeah.
Or never be good at conversing with people naturally. And without drinking, it's kind of like I wasn't able to escape anymore my nervousness or feelings of like not being good enough or comfortable or whatever it was. And so I just had to acclimate and become used to and accept the state of being me. And I feel like that's been instead of it having this easy escape, it's actually made me much more comfortable in my own life in general.
Yeah, I think I think I see what you're saying, because it allows you to maybe instead of if you're nervous about something or feeling self-conscious, I think what alcohol does is it kind of like quiets that voice in your head.
Yeah.
But you could also just ignore that voice.
Yeah.
And I think with practice, it becomes easier and easier to do so.
Sure. All right. That's pretty much the things I want to talk about. Anything on your mind?
Well, how much? Okay, let me just ask the kind of meta conversation. Like, how much in this podcast are you talking about, I think, your own stories?
I'm talking about if there's any you want to call out for the listener, I'm happy to. It depends on kind of who I'm talking to. For with Michael, we basically just shot the shit and talked about there's a lot of shared stories, So yeah.
Because I'm curious. We all, a lot of our core friend group, we all met around the same time in 2005 and kind of went on these journeys together, kind of life journeys and startup journeys. And I wonder, from your perspective, now that you've got like a little bit more calm in your life, right? You're out of a company, you've got a kid, you're up in Sea Ranch. What kind of learnings or thoughts that you have when you can kind of reflect back on all that time with a little bit more space?
Yeah, it's been an incredible adventure, right? It's such a crazy story. And that's what I cover in this book that I've been writing. I wrote down like all of the stories of everything, all the crazy stories, and it's like I don't wish anything was different. I don't actually wish that I had discovered calm and kind of the person who I am today 10 years ago, because I don't think I was ready for it. There's kind of a place and time for everything. I don't even wish I quit drinking earlier or anything. I feel like I've been going through life with the right mindset for the right at every point in my life. In the early days, early 20s, I was like obsessed with being successful and in the startup world, and very much in the same headspace that you were. I wanted to prove it. And there were lots of failures along the path and not proving it and like things not working out. But eventually, we did sell Twitch, and that was a huge external validation. And all of a sudden I was the man in Silicon Valley for, some period of time, and felt really good. And was, I don't think I could have ever gotten there without the relentless self-torture of the 8 years leading up to that, worrying about every aspect of the business and really trying our hardest to roll the boulder uphill to make the startup work. And so it served me in a way. Like a lot of the things that were negatives or maybe difficult emotions or like needs to prove myself to the external world or like really wanting external validation, all those things really served me because, I have a very nice setup now. But there's just a right time and place for everything is kind of how I view it. And today, as I've grown and learned more about who I am and needed less escapes and have been able to be more calm and be more present, I feel like it's the right time for that too, especially as I have the kid.
I totally get what you mean. I've kind of had a similar thought about the, the value of the like naivety and arrogance of youth.
Yeah.
And then also the joy I get of having that time be over.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, you remember all of the positives sometimes, or it's easy to remember like the positives from those early days and the camaraderie and like fun experiences we had. But then there was a lot of like, tough stuff too. And
oh gosh, I do so much cringing whenever I like reflect on that time of just like stuff I said and stuff I did and I have these kind of dual thoughts, of like, gosh, I could have been so much more effective if I did, blah, or like didn't do that. But then I don't know, it would have been a different path.
Exactly. It's kind of like what you said earlier, which is you're just being the best Steve that you can be. Right. And I feel the same way. It's like if I had made different choices, I certainly could have been better on almost any axis, success in the internet or like well-being or anything. But that's just not my path. It's, I'm being the best Justin that I can be at every step along the path. And that's all you can expect.
What's really exciting is that when I turned like, it's like 31, somewhere around there, maybe 32. I had a taxi driver in LA and he was like a kind of a Venice Beach hippie type, old soul in California. And we had like a hour-long drive to LAX. And he asked me, he was like, how old are you? We were just kind of chatting about life and stuff. He's like, how old are you? I was like, I'm 31. He's like, oh man, you are in your prime. I was feeling like my best years are behind me almost.
Yeah.
Like all young people do, perpetually. So I was just like, oh, my 20s are over and, now I'm an adult. And he's like, no, you're in your prime. Like you're young enough to have fun, but you're old enough to like know what you like and to like understand how the world works a little better. And you can basically kind of get along with anybody or do anything you want. Like, gosh, that's just the best time of life. And it was so funny. And so every time, and I just kind of look back at every point in my life since when I graduated college, I was like really sad. I was like, oh, they say those are your best years. I'm so sorry they're over. Yeah. And then when I was out of college for 4 years, so when I was out of college, as long as I was in college, I was like, oh my gosh, it's just like slipping away. And then turned 30, another midlife crisis. And finally, like, I think ever since that taxi driver, I keep asking myself, like, well, I must still be in my prime because things keep getting better. I actually, like, I look back on the last 5 years and I'm like, well, they were really great. Way better than the 5 years before that. And come to think of it, those are better than the 5 years before that. So I get really excited when I look towards the future and think, I can't wait to like be actually old. See how many more step functions there are.
I heard actually from someone a while ago, and they were telling me that, when you're in your 40s, you think your 40s are great. When you the best decade, and then when you're in your 50s, you actually think the 50s are your best decade, and then the 60s and so on. And I was like, how is that possible? Because your body's kind of breaking down, you're like have less energy. But I think that the human brain is programmed with this continual perspective shift to help it adapt to the circumstances that it's in all the way till you're on your deathbed, and it doesn't seem like as big of a problem anymore. You're like, I'm ready to die, which is a completely illogical, kind of thing to think for a living organism. But I think that we have been programmed to be able to adapt and be happy and excited about whatever circumstances we're in.
Yeah, it's funny. I can't. By and large, I don't.
That was
think
my
I've
conversation with Steve Huffman.
Older than
if you enjoyed it, please rate us on iTunes.
Talk about
and
like
you can
kind of
follow
their
me at
decade
Justin Conn on
as
Twitter.
having some like
thanks, and see you guys next time.
Really nice qualities and silver linings.
Yeah.
My dad bitches about his knees all the time, but he's been doing that since I was, a little kid, and I've been bitching about my knees since I was 20. So maybe that's just one thing that'll be constant. But otherwise, like, yeah, there seems to be so much kind of more peace as people age. So that makes me actually really optimistic.
Yeah, we got a lot to look forward to. Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure. I hope it comes out good.
That was my conversation with Steve. I really hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. One thing that has stuck with me since we recorded this a while ago was Steve's line about being the best Steve Huffman that he can be. And I've actually thought about this a lot in the intervening time since we had our conversation. As someone who's always looked at what others were doing better or being more successful and really struggled with feeling that I should be doing differently, it was really a great reminder to just let go of that and focus on being the best version of myself. Steve's point on having a different origin story than Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos was really well taken. We're all coming from different places in life and have our own individual story and path. And our journey really isn't comparable to anyone else's. Even though we're often trapped in cycles of comparison, when we look much more deeply, it becomes apparent that comparison doesn't make sense. People are coming from different places with different backgrounds and different opportunities and different educations and different genes. And that's something that I've always needed to internalize. So I really hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you did, bang out that 5-star rating on iTunes. And hit me up on Twitter at Justin Conn if you like the podcast or if you have any feedback. Otherwise, I will see you next week, and I love you all.